Picture this. President Donald Trump striding confidently down the red carpet at the Kennedy Center, expecting a hero's welcome for the opening night of Les Misérables on June 11, 2025. Instead, the crowd delivers a stinging rebuke, boos echoing through the prestigious venue, drowning out the smattering of applause from his supporters. Why did they do that? What could prompt such a visceral reaction from an audience at one of Washington, D.C.'s most iconic cultural institutions? The answer lies not just in the moment, but in the chaotic backdrop of a nation and world on edge. As Trump smiled and pointed, seemingly unfazed, reports were swirling of an imminent war in the Middle East, with Israel poised to strike Iran and U.S. embassies evacuating personnel from the region. Meanwhile, Trump was touting a controversial $5 million Trump Cards citizenship scheme and dismissing concerns about escalating global tensions with a casual could be dangerous. What happened to lead us here, where a president is booed at a cultural event while the specter of war looms large? Let's dive into the details of this extraordinary moment, unpacking the political, cultural, and international forces at play, and explore why Trump's appearance at the Kennedy Center became a lightning rod for public discontent. The Kennedy Center incident, a public rebuke. On the evening of June 11, 2025, President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump arrived at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., to attend the opening night of Les Misérables, a musical known for its themes of revolution, redemption, and resistance against oppression. The event was meant to be a high-profile cultural outing, a chance for Trump to project an image of sophistication and normalcy amid his tumultuous second term. However, the reception he received was anything but warm. As reported by multiple sources, including posts on X and an Associated Press article, the audience greeted Trump with a mix of cheers and boos, with the latter dominating the soundscape. According to @Megan Messerly, the crowd broke into a brief USA chant, but the boos were unmistakable, a public expression of disapproval that cut through the carefully curated atmosphere of the evening. The booing was particularly striking given the context. The Kennedy Center, a bastion of American arts and culture, is not typically a venue for overt political protest. Yet, the audience, described as heavily vetted in some reports, could not contain their frustration. Signs of dissent were visible even before Trump's arrival, with attendees wearing shirts proclaiming messages like "Democracy has no kings" and "Abolish ICE," signaling a broader discontent with Trump's policies and persona. The presence of these slogans underscored the polarized atmosphere, where even a night at the theater became a battleground for political expression. Adding a layer of irony to the evening, a group of drag queens who arrived before Trump reportedly received far louder applause from the crowd. This contrast, highlighted in the provided content, painted a vivid picture. While Trump, the sitting president, struggled to garner support, performers embodying a spirit of inclusivity and cultural defiance were celebrated. The drag queens' warm reception stood in stark contrast to Trump's mixed response, amplifying the narrative that his presidency was failing to resonate with a significant portion of the public. This moment was not just about a performance. It was a microcosm of the cultural and political divide gripping the nation, the Kennedy Center's transformation under Trump. To understand why Trump's appearance sparked such a reaction, we must examine his administration's influence over the Kennedy Center itself. Since taking office in his second term, Trump has sought to reshape the institution, appointing loyalists like Usha Vance, Susie Wiles, Maria Bartiromo, and Laura Ingraham to its board. These appointments, reported by AP News, reflect Trump's broader strategy of asserting control over cultural institutions, aiming to align them with his political vision. His stated goal was to bring it back better than ever, but the reality has been far more contentious. The Kennedy Center, once a symbol of bipartisan cultural patronage, has become a flashpoint under Trump's influence. Several high-profile artists, including Issa Rae, Rhiannon Giddens, Ben Folds, and Renee Fleming, have either canceled appearances or resigned from advisory roles in protest of the center's new direction. Touring productions like Hamilton have also pulled out, and subscription package sales have reportedly declined. The booing of Trump can thus be seen as part of a broader backlash against his politicization of the arts, with attendees signaling their rejection of a president who has sought to bend cultural institutions to his will. This cultural clash was further highlighted by Trump's response to questions about actors boycotting the event. When asked about the reported boycotts, he deflected, saying, "All I do is run the country well," and touted economic numbers and tariff revenues. This dismissal only fueled perceptions of arrogance, as Trump appeared to prioritize his self-image over engaging with the cultural community's concerns. For many in the audience, the booing was not just a reaction to Trump's presence, but a rejection of his broader agenda, which they saw as antithetical to the values of creativity, inclusivity, and freedom that the Kennedy Center historically represents. The Middle East crisis, a looming war, overshadows the night. The Kennedy Center incident did not occur in a vacuum. As Trump walked the red carpet, the world was grappling with the prospect of an escalating conflict in the Middle East. Reports from CBS News and The Washington Post indicated that Israel was preparing for a potential military operation against Iran, with U.S. officials anticipating possible Iranian retaliation against American sites in Iraq. The U.S. had ordered embassies in the region, including those in Iraq, parts of Eastern Europe and North Africa, to convene emergency action committees and evacuate non-essential personnel. These developments, confirmed by posts on X from accounts like @Alexkandi Iran and @Real Daily Wire, painted a picture of a region on the brink. When questioned about these evacuations on the red carpet, Trump's response was characteristically vague. "They're being moved out. It could be a dangerous place. We'll see what happens." He added, "Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. We won't allow it," signaling a hardline stance on Iran's nuclear ambitions, but offering little clarity on the unfolding crisis. This nonchalance, juxtaposed with the gravity of the situation, likely contributed to the audience's frustration. Here was a president attending a theater performance while the world teetered on the edge of war, seemingly more concerned with his public image than with addressing the global stakes. The Middle East crisis has its roots in long-standing tensions, exacerbated by recent developments. Trump's first term saw the U.S. withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA, a move that critics argue destabilized the region by removing constraints on Iran's nuclear program. In his second term, Trump has pivoted toward direct negotiations with Iran, a shift that has caught allies like Israel off guard. His decision to halt U.S. airstrikes on the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen, announced without consulting Israel, further strained relations with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. These policy shifts, combined with Trump's focus on securing economic deals with Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, have led to perceptions that he prioritizes financial gain over strategic stability. The Gaza conflict, ongoing since the October 7, 2023, Hamas attack, has further complicated the regional picture. Israel's military operations, including airstrikes that have killed over 52,000 Palestinians according to some estimates, have drawn international condemnation and strained U.S.-Arab relations. Trump's controversial Gaza Riviera plan, which proposed resettling Palestinians and developing Gaza into a commercial hub, has been largely abandoned after widespread backlash. His failure to visit Israel during his recent Middle East trip, despite stops in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, was seen as a snub to Netanyahu, who has pushed for a more aggressive U.S. stance against Iran. For many Americans, particularly those aligned with the Democratic Party, Trump's handling of these crises is emblematic of his broader foreign policy failures. His focus on deal-making, evidenced by the $1 trillion in investments secured from Gulf states, has overshadowed efforts to address humanitarian crises in Gaza or prevent a broader regional war. The booing at the Kennedy Center can thus be seen as a reflection of public anxiety about Trump's leadership at a time when decisive action is needed to avert catastrophe. The Trump cards controversy. Citizenship for sale? Adding fuel to the public's discontent was Trump's announcement, just before his Kennedy Center appearance, of a $5 million Trump Cards program. According to the provided content, this initiative allows individuals from Asia, including the Middle East, to purchase U.S. citizenship for a staggering $5 million. The scheme, framed as a pay-to-play pathway to citizenship, has sparked outrage among critics who see it as a blatant commodification of American values. For Democrats, this move epitomizes Trump's transactional approach to governance, where wealth trumps merit and access to citizenship is auctioned to the highest bidder. The Trump Cards program aligns with Trump's broader economic agenda, which emphasizes tariffs and financial deals to bolster the U.S. economy. On the red carpet, he boasted about taking in $88 billion in tariffs over 2.5 months, claiming it had cut the deficit in half. However, these claims are misleading. The U.S. deficit has not decreased significantly, and economists argue that tariffs often raise consumer prices and disrupt global trade, contradicting Trump's narrative of economic success. The Trump Cards initiative, with its exorbitant price tag, further alienates those who view immigration as a humanitarian issue rather than a business opportunity. This policy also raises ethical questions about equity and access. At a time when millions of immigrants face bureaucratic hurdles and years-long waits for legal status, offering citizenship to wealthy foreigners undermines the principles of fairness and opportunity that Democrats champion. The backlash against this program likely contributed to the hostile reception Trump received at the Kennedy Center, as attendees saw it as yet another example of his administration prioritizing profit over people. Domestic discontent, protests, polls, and political polarization. The Kennedy Center incident occurred against a backdrop of growing domestic unrest. Trump's approval ratings, as cited in the provided content, have plummeted to 38%, with 54% of Americans disapproving of his handling of immigration and 53% opposing his budget bill. Protests have spread to 16 cities across the U.S., fueled by discontent over policies like the Trump Cards program, his aggressive immigration enforcement, and his deployment of the National Guard to quell demonstrations in Los Angeles. Trump's claims about Los Angeles were particularly inflammatory. He asserted that the city would be burning to the ground without his intervention, citing radical left lunatics and professional protesters who were chopping up concrete to use as weapons. These statements, widely debunked as exaggerations, ignored the largely peaceful nature of the protests before federal intervention escalated tensions. Critics argue that Trump's rhetoric demonizes dissent and inflates minor incidents to justify heavy-handed tactics, further polarizing the nation. The Los Angeles protests, in particular, have become a flashpoint. Trump claimed that ICE officers were holed up in a building and attacked, necessitating National Guard intervention. However, reports suggest that the protests were manageable until federal forces arrived, escalating the situation. This pattern of federal overreach has drawn comparisons to the 2020 protests, where Trump's use of federal agents in cities like Portland was widely criticized as authoritarian. Public sentiment, as reflected in polls and the Kennedy Center reaction, suggests that Trump's leadership style, marked by bravado, exaggeration, and a disregard for dissenting voices, is wearing thin. His claim to have stopped tremendous destruction and death in Los Angeles is seen by many as a self-serving narrative, unsupported by evidence, and designed to bolster his image as a strongman leader. For Democrats, this rhetoric is not just misleading but dangerous, as it stokes division and undermines trust in institutions. Trump's cultural disconnect, Les Misérables, and the irony of the night. The choice of Les Misérables as the backdrop for Trump's appearance added a layer of irony to the evening. The musical, based on Victor Hugo's novel, tells the story of Jean Valjean, a man seeking redemption in a society plagued by inequality and injustice. When asked whether he identified more with Valjean or his pursuer, Javert, Trump dodged the question, saying, "That's a tough one," and claiming to have seen the show a number of times. His vague response and visible head shake suggested a lack of familiarity with the story, further highlighting his disconnect from the cultural moment. For many in the audience, the themes of Les Misérables, resistance against oppressive systems, the fight for justice, and the power of collective action, likely resonated more with their opposition to Trump than with his presence. The booing can be seen as a symbolic act of rebellion, akin to the revolutionary spirit depicted in the musical. The contrast between Trump's policies, which critics argue favor the wealthy and powerful, and the story's focus on the marginalized and oppressed, made his appearance at the Kennedy Center all the more jarring. The drag queen's enthusiastic reception further underscored this cultural divide. Their arrival, celebrated with loud applause, represented a celebration of diversity and defiance against conservative efforts to suppress marginalized communities. Trump's administration, with its history of rolling back protections for LGBTQ+ individuals, stood in stark contrast to the inclusive spirit embodied by the drag performers. This moment encapsulated the broader cultural battle playing out in America, where progressive values of inclusion and equity clash with Trump's vision of a nation defined by wealth and power. The broader context: a presidency under fire. Trump's second term has been marked by a series of controversies that have eroded his public support. His budget bill, dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, was blocked by a coalition of Republican hardliners and Democrats, signaling bipartisan dissatisfaction with his fiscal policies. Economic indicators, such as a Moody's downgrade of the U.S. credit rating, reflect growing concerns about the nation's soaring debt and high interest rates. Trump's claim of cutting the deficit in half is not only unsubstantiated, but contradicted by these economic realities. His immigration policies, including the use of wartime powers for deportations, have also faced legal challenges. The Supreme Court's decision to block some of these deportations in Texas further undermines Trump's narrative of unchecked authority. His response on Truth Social, "The Supreme Court won't allow U.S. to get criminals out of our country," reflects his frustration with institutional checks on his power, a recurring theme in his presidency. Internationally, Trump's focus on deal-making has drawn criticism for prioritizing economic gains over human rights and regional stability. His Middle East trip, which secured over $1 trillion in investments from Gulf states, was touted as a triumph of economic diplomacy, but failed to address pressing issues like the Gaza war or Iran's nuclear ambitions. Critics argue that Trump's transactional approach, exemplified by the Trump Cards program and his embrace of authoritarian Gulf leaders, undermines America's moral leadership on the global stage. For Democrats, these failures are evidence of a presidency that prioritizes spectacle over substance. The Kennedy Center booing was not just a reaction to Trump's presence, but a culmination of frustration with a leader who seems out of touch with the nation's values and the world's challenges. As one attendee's sign put it, "Democracy has no kings," a pointed rebuke of Trump's authoritarian tendencies and a call for a return to democratic principles.